Good morning student, welcome to GM Donda Primary Schools. Today we are going to learn about chapter 10, The Great Stone Face part 2. Before we read the chapter, we have small introduction to the chapter. That is, many years past, Ernest was now a middle-aged man to his neighbor who never suspected that he could be anything more than an ordinary and familiar face. He was only humble and hardworking though thoughtful person. But what about the old prophecy? Was it ever fulfilled? Let us read and find out the chapter. So the years hurried on, and bowed white hairs upon the head of the Ernest, and red wrinkles across his forehead, and furrows in his cheeks. Furrows means deep lines. He was an old man, but not in the veins had he grown old. More numerous than the white hair on his head were the wise thoughts in his mind. Means now, as he was growing old, but he was not growing old from inside, he was very young, and his thoughts were more numerous than before in his mind. And Ernest has ceased to be an obscure, unsought for, undesired, had come to the fame which so many seeks. So there now the Ernest was gaining fame among the people. He had become famous beyond the limits of the valley. Here the beyond the limits of valley means he was not only famous in their own village, but he was very familiar out of the village also. College professor and even the active men of the city came from far to see and converse with the Ernest. So many people out of the village comes to Ernest to have a conversation with him. And he received them with a gentle sincerity and spoke freely with them with whatever came uppermost or lay deepest in the heart of their own. While they talked together, his face would brighten unaware and shine upon them as with a mild evening light. While the Ernest was growing old, God has granted a new poet to this earth. He too was a native of a valley. So there was a poet, and he was a native of the valley, but had spent greater part of his life to a distant city, pouring out the sweet music everywhere. Neither was a great stone face forgotten, for the poet had celebrated it in his poem. The song of the poet found their way to the Ernest. He read them after the customary toil, seated on the bench before the cottage door. As he read, he lifted his eye to the mountain. So the Ernest would read the poem sitting outside his cottage bench. And customary toil means usual work. After he completed his usual work, he would go and sit on the bench near the door of his cottage, and would read the poem. "O great stone face," he said, "is not this man worthy to be your likeness?" The face seemed to smile but did not answer. So now it happened that the poet, though he lived so far away, had not only heard about the Ernest, but had thought much about his character and wished to meet the man whose wisdom walked hand in hand with the noble simplicity of his life, with the noble simplicity of the life. So years and now the poet was living far away, but he wished to meet the old wise man Ernest. One summer day, therefore, he arrived at Ernest's door, where he found the good old man was holding a book in his hand, which he read, and then, with the fingers between the leaves, looked lovingly at the great stone face. So this was when the situation described by the poet when he arrived at the Ernest's door. "Good evening," said the poet. "Can you give me, a traveler, a night shelter?" So here the poet is asking to the Ernest that, "Can you give a night shelter to me?" gladly answered the Ernest, and then he added, smiling, I think I never saw the great stone face look so hospitality at a stranger. Sorry, hospitable to the stranger means gently and kindly at a stranger. So here is the Ernest with white hairs, wrinkle on the face, etc. And that is a poet who has came to his house. The poet sat down beside him and he and Ernest talked together. Never before had the poet talked with a man like Ernest, so wise and gentle and kind. Ernest, on the other hand, was moved by the living image flung out of the poet's mind. So they both sat together and talked about, and the poet never talked to a person like the Ernest who was so wise and gentle and kind. As Ernest listened to the poet, he imagined that the great stone face was behind forward to listen to. Sorry, binding forward to listen to. He gazed into the poet's eyes. So the Ernest listened to the poet. He imagined that the great stone face was bending forward. Bending forward means he was coming forward to listen the Ernest. Who are you, my gifted guest? He asked. The poet laid his finger on the book that Ernest has been reading. So the Ernest asked, Who are you? The poet fingered to the book which Ernest was reading. You have read this poem, said he. You know me then, for I wrote them. So it was the book of the poet. And the poet is telling, you would know, you have read all this poem, then you would be knowing me because it's I who wrote all this poem. Again and again, Ernest examined the poet's features. He turned towards the great stone face, then back. He shook his head and sighed. Why are you sad? Inquired the poet. Because, replied Ernest, all though life I have awaited the fulfillment of the prophecy, and when I read this poem, I hope that it might be fulfilled in you. Means the Ernest was sad because he had a hope, because he was reading the book and he had a hope that he was awaiting to fulfill the prophecy that there was a person on the earth who would be looking same like the great stone face. But when I read this poem, there was a hope it would be fulfilled by you. You hope? Answered the poet, faintly smiling. Faintly means slightly smiling. To find in me the likeness of the great stone face, I am not worthy to be its likeness. The poet answered that if you are finding such likeness in this of a great stone on my face, I am not worthy, means I am not that worthy to be its likeness. And why not? Asked Ernest. He pointed to the book. Are not those thoughts worthy? Means no, you are. Means the Ernest is asking question to the poet by pointing the book. Are those thoughts not worthy? You can hear in them the distant voice of the heavenly songs, but my life, dear Ernest, has not corresponded with my thoughts. Be in harmony with my means it has not been gone step by step with my life. मेरे थॉट्स और मेरी लाइफ एक साथ चल नहीं रहे हैं. उसका मतलब ये हुआ, I have had grand dreams, but they have been only dreams. The poets had many grand dreams, but it was only dream on the non-dream, but it were not fulfilled. Sometimes I lack in faith in my own thoughts. I lack faith in my own thoughts means that the poet had a doubt on his own thought, or he would have a doubt that it would not be fulfilled by him. Why then, pure seeker of a good and true, should you hope to find me in the face of the mountain? So the poet spoke sadly, and his eyes were wet with the tears. So too were those of Ernest. They both started crying because they felt emotional. At the hour of sunset, at the hour of the sunset, as had long been his habit, Ernest was to speak to a group of neighbors in the open air. So it was custom, or say a habit or a regular basis, that Ernest would speak to the group of people of the village in an open air, means a small get together in an open village. Together he and the poet went to the meeting place, arms in arm. From there could be seen the great stone face. So it was a place from which you can see the great stone face clearly. Ernest threw a look of familiar kindness around upon his audience. He began to speak to the people what was in his heart and mind. So this was on regular basis. The Ernest would share his thoughts to the people. His word had a power because they agreed with his thoughts, and his thought had a reality and depth, because they harmonized with the life which he had always lived. The thoughts which were shared by the Ernest was very real, or you can say depth, because it was harmonized with the life, means कॉरेस्पॉन्डेंट और एग्रीड, मतलब वो उसकी लाइफ के साथ चल रहे थे, जो वो लाइफ लीव कर रहा था उसकी जैसे ही वो उसके थॉट्स थे और वो जो सोचता था वैसे ही वो लाइफ जी रहा था, विच ही हैड ऑलवेज लिव्ड, मतलब उसने जैसा जिया, मतलब वो जैसी लाइफ लीव कर रहा था वैसे ही बात करता था. इट वॉज नॉट मेयर ब्रीथ दैट अ पिक्चर अटर्ड, दे वे द वर्ड्स ऑफ द लाइफ, अ लाइफ ऑफ अ गुड डीड्स एंड सेल्फलेस लव was melted into them. So it was not mere of words that someone spoke for motivation or for sharing everything. It was a words of the life. It was a good deed and selfless love. The poet, as he listened, felt that the life and character of Ernest was nobler strain of the poetry that he had been ever written. His eyes filled with the tears, and he said to himself that never was there so worthy as a sag as that mild, sweet, thoughtful face with the glory of white hairs diffused about it. Sag means wise man. At a distance, but clearly to be seen, high up in the golden light of a setting sun, appeared the great stone face with the white mist around it, like the white hairs around the brown Ernest. At the moment, Ernest's face looked on an expression so grand that the poet was moved to throw his arms up and shout, "Behold, behold, Ernest is himself the likeness of the great stone face." So as the sun appeared, the great stone face, it was a mist around and the white hairs around the Ernest, and as the expression was so grand that poet ने उसको किया hold on. The Ernest himself is the likeness of the great wall of great stone face. The poet ने बोला कि देखो, अर्नेस्ट ही वो बंदा है जो ग्रेट स्टोन फेस की तरह दिखता है. Then all the people looked and saw that what he poet said was true. The prophecy was fulfilled. But the Ernest, having finished what he had to say, looked the poet arms and walked slowly homeward, still hoping that some wiser and better man than himself could by appear bearing just a second, bearing a resemblance to the greater stone face. Now everyone was believing that it was the Ernest who was looking like a great stone face, but Ernest was still in a hope that some wiser or better man than himself could by appearing would come again would look like great stone face. So this is all the story about the grey stone face part 2. I hope all you understood the chapter. Will be sending you PDF for further details. Thank you students. Have a nice day.